Hi guys, this is Siri from Siri Tutor Blogs and welcome to my BA Artifact series. Today we are going to look into derived sequence diagrams. Before we deep dive into the answer, I would like to request you all to please like, share and subscribe to my channel, and let's get started. So I before going ahead with the derived sequence diagrams, I would like to explain you sequence diagrams. I already made a blog for the sequence diagrams separately. So sequence diagrams are created by the architects and senior developers, technical people who will be working in our project, and we have to understand those sequence diagram to understand how the different systems interacts each other, and how they are working behind the scenes with the API method calls and all those things. So it's very technical, high level, and we take those sequence diagrams and convert them, derive a derived sequence diagram out of it. We have to create, it's our responsibility to create a derived sequence diagrams. And we define we will identify different systems first after understanding the sequence diagrams, and even after understanding the functional flow, a functional process flow diagrams, which is like it shows how the business process works step by step. And after after analyzing these two diagrams, we have to come up with our own derived sequence diagrams, where we will understand what are the different systems which are involved, like UI, API, database and external services like notifications or whatever, several payment gateways, all the external services which will be interacting with our uh, business flow, right? So we understand those all flows, and then we have to map the sequence of interactions between them. So these diagrams will help us understand the dependencies, the the response handling, and the interaction points. So the and also it will help us to understand the different interaction points, as I said. So let's the mainly the sequence flow diagram, the derived sequence flow diagram illustrates like how multiple systems interacts with each other step by step during one of the transaction dispute process. So let's understand how this process works, the transaction dispute process. So the whole flow begins at the UI level, where the user is going to initiate a request to view a transaction, and that request is going to pass or it's going to initiate and invoke API layers, and which is API layers or backend services we call. And backend services are going to initiate or interact with the backend service database services, where it's going to validate whether all the eligible transactions from the backend, and once it retrieves all the eligible transactions, it will give the response back to the UI. And the customer is going to select that one particular transaction and fill out all the dispute form, and again the UI is going to send out a post request call with all the request payload, and sends across to the API layer. API layer in turn calls dispute APIs, which where the dispute API is going to do some validations against the database, like the customer validation, or it will in or it will going to reinforce some business rules, like whether the transaction is within 90 days or the amount is below 1000 or above 1000, or whether the transaction is not already has been disputed. These kind of verifications checks it's going to do. And then it once it's all the validations are successful, it's going to uh, interact with the database services, where it makes a database write operation call, and it is going to create a dispute case and generates a unique dispute case ID there. And and once the dispute case ID is created, the backend services in turn calls another notification API services, where the notification API services is going to and is responsible in generating the email notification to the customer, letting him know that a dispute case ID has been created with this reference number. And then finally the response is sent back in the same order through the same path and returned back to the UI. uh, once uh, once the response is sent to the user with a confirmation message, that is where the transaction things will be completed. This is how the usually the flow is going to. This is one of the sample flows that I have explained you. There will be so many flows that we will be dealing with on day-to-day activities in our project for the derived sequence diagram. So now we will look into a simple derived sequence diagram in detail, and we'll understand how the flow works. Sequence diagram, derived sequence diagram, where the customer is going to inquire for the bank for a transaction, and the bank is in turn is going to list off all the transactions offered. It's going to list all the transaction back to the user, and user is going to choose one of the transactions here. And then the transaction is processed here in the transaction details, and the transaction information, and confirms this transaction, whether if it is yes or no. If it is yes, it processes the transaction, and transaction details are sent back to the UI, to the user. If it is no, if the transaction is cancelled and choose another offer, it gives more options for the user to make the selection. So after this submission, once this transaction is a correct transaction, the user is going to make a dispute submission information. He's going to submit the information, and those things are going to process in the database, requirement database here, and then it will respond back from the saying that transaction is complete. That is this is one of the derived sequence flow diagrams. See here, the main difference between derived sequence flow diagram and the sequence diagrams. We are not specifying any in-depth API method calls here. We are just adding the what is it called, actors here, and the method actions. That's it. The detailed API method actions, not the method calls, like how we have shown it in the sequence diagram. I will consolidate all these diagrams in a separate video, and I will share with you guys. Don't worry, but there is a difference. Definitely, you will understand when I share them. So this is another type of sequence diagram. See, yeah, if you look into this, this is the actual sequence diagram, and this is the derived sequence diagrams which were developed by the business analysts, and this is one which is developed by the created by the developers. So if what I'm meant to say is API method calls, all these are method calls. See, this is how, this is a sequence diagram, this is not API, this is not derived sequence diagrams. So if you look into this, the user is going to send the username password, then it is going to validate if the account details are correct or not. It will be validated in at this layer, at this level, and he makes some withdrawals, he makes some deposits, and he makes some enquiries. So based on each request, those requests will be validated in the respected API calls. Okay, that is pretty much it. See, this is another one. API A is going to make a call to API C, and API C here we are going to process it and redirect the call to the API B with the refund information. The same thing again, API C is going to make a place order on API A, and API A is going to do some processing here and calls a distribute method, and it calls a API B, and API B does some processing work here, and it's going to call bill underscore reports, and the response is given back to the API C. So that is, yeah, this is another one. So this is, I think, derived sequence diagram, if I am not wrong. Yeah, see, everything is again explained in detail. So this is another sequence diagram. Um, so as a business analyst, we have to know all these derived sequence diagrams, how to create derived sequence diagram out of the derive out of the sequence diagram. It's very important to know. I hope you like this video. Please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you guys. Bye.